What is up, Bitcoiners? Welcome to the Bitcoin Magazine podcast. As always, it's your host, CK, and I'm actually here with a young but incredibly talented and awesome Bitcoiner, William Clemente. William is part of our team as our on-chain expert, and we had an amazing podcast with Rafael, the CTO of Glassnode. Before we get into the podcast, though, let's talk about William. William, welcome to your Bitcoin Magazine podcast debut.
Thanks a lot, CK. It's awesome to be on. I really enjoyed this conversation with Rafael. I had been looking forward to it, but it really kind of blew my expectations out of the water.
That's awesome. Yeah, I thought it turned out great. You did a great job, and the listeners are going to love this one. It is absolutely jam-packed with just on-chain analysis, data, wisdom about what is actually happening on-chain, as well as a lot of just alpha around what are the best metrics. So all of the metrics that we talked about are in the article and show note associated with this podcast. But yeah, I guess, Will, why don't you kind of just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? You're a young gun jumping into Bitcoin, and really, your understanding of the kind of macro as well as on-chain is pretty elite. So I guess, how did you get here?
Yeah, sure. So I really gotten into Bitcoin, I'm going to say in late June of last year, kind of took a financial angle to it, and then really understanding its place in kind of the macro landscape. And then in the last I would say maybe 2-3 months, I really started going down the whole rabbit hole with the on-chain data. And luckily, you guys, brought me on, and I'm excited to work with you guys and put out more content in relation to the on-chain data. So that's pretty much what I'm doing all the time, and what I'm excited to do full time over the summer once I'm done with school for you guys. So.
Yeah, let's go. So Bitcoin Magazine listeners out there, get hyped. Will is going to be putting out some amazing content. He's already started putting out great content on Bitcoin Magazine, but we're taking it to the next level, and hopefully we can get him even better on-chain analysis, so he can bring even more value. But this podcast wasn't really about Will. Will was asking the questions. This podcast was about Rafael. Rafael helped build Glassnode into one of the best and most important names in on-chain analytics. Will, what was your take on this podcast, and what did you think were the most important tidbits?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think Glassnode is the flagship product in this industry. I think they really are best in class, best in the business. So it was interesting to hear from those who don't know, Rafael is really in there in the trenches on the back end, helping put in some of the data. There's a lot of on-chain analysts. I think the most well-known is Willy Woo, but Rafael has an interesting perspective because he's actually in the trenches, understanding what goes into the data and the different metrics. So it was interesting to hear his take on a lot of things, especially in regards to, how this cycle might be different, some of the metrics that he's seeing on chain that make him think that. And then as well, he touched on some things that I think a lot of Bitcoiners have heard about, such as, supply on exchanges, miners not selling, these kinds of things. And then also where we're kind of headed in terms of how overheated this cycle is currently, and how some of these metrics that we've traditionally used to time the cycle tops may be invalidated this time around.
Yeah, is this a super cycle? That is kind of the question, at least of the past quarter. And, I'm kind of ruined that it is a super cycle, but that's just because I'm always, irresponsibly bullish. So whether that's at the bottom or at the top, always bullish, always be bullish. Guys, this was a great podcast, and it was really bullish. Rafael really, made me feel great about my bullish position, just because, he sees Bitcoin on chain and he is bullish, right? He understands what is happening every single day. He's really in the trenches, like Will said. And you know what else is really bullish? The Bitcoin 2021 conference. Bitcoin 2021 is going to be an absolutely unbelievable gathering. Matt Odell is calling it the 200K party. John Vallis, the Meister of the 100K party, is going to be there, and so is Michael Saylor. So the chances of a Bitcoin pleb getting onto a yacht to celebrate for some sort of six-digit figure Bitcoin price is very, very high at Bitcoin 2021. So personally, I'm very pumped. I hope to get onto one of those yachts, but also not holding my breath because there's just going to be so many things to do, and I'm going to get pulled in so many different directions. Will, I mean, you've been looking at the speaker lineup. You're going to be there helping us out. Which speakers are you going to take time in and like mark your calendar off? Like, I got to see this speaker.
Gosh, I don't think I have much of a different opinion than many Bitcoiners. Obviously Saylor, you're going to have to tune in for that one. And then Jack Dorsey will be interesting to hear from as well, I think.
Yeah. Are you going to hang out with Preston Page? I know you two have been talking a lot.
Yeah, man, I'm going to hunt him down. I'm going to find him. I've been looking forward to chatting with him there, and obviously a couple other guys, but it'll be good, just to bump into some people that you otherwise wouldn't have access to meetings. So I think it's definitely a must attend event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to kind of like add some more bullishness to that, complete Bitcoin takeover Miami, the entire week leading up to the conference. I'm personally getting there on the 1st. The actual conference starts on the 4th. And every single day I'm putting together this satellite events list. And every single day already, there's something going down, whether it's a Bitcoin run, whether that is a Socratic seminar, or whether it is some other type of meetup or party. I think there's a basketball tournament going down. Larry from the block is organizing things on Twitter. Like, things are popping off for the Bitcoin conference. So get your tickets because ticket prices are going up and the likelihood of us selling out is like 100%. So if you're listening to this podcast, you can get 10% off if you use promo code Satoshi. And if you pay with Bitcoin, you can get an additional $50 off. So encourage you to maximize your savings, pay with Bitcoin, use a promo code Satoshi, and see everyone in Miami. All right, well, let's get into this podcast with Rafael. Welcome to a very special episode of the Bitcoin Magazine podcast. As you already know, I'm here with a new co-host. This is William Clemente, who is part of the Bitcoin Magazine team as our on-staff on-chain analyst and economist. So this guy is young, but he is full of knowledge and wisdom. And we are super excited to be speaking with Rafael Schultze-Kraft from Glassnode. He is the CTO and co-founder. And again, Glassnode has been making huge waves as just being the premier place to get insight into the Bitcoin blockchain and the Bitcoin ecosystem. So we are super honored to have Rafael's precious time. How's it going, Rafael?
How are you doing? Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today.
Perfect. So, Rafael, for the people who are living under a rock, not into on-chain analytics yet, tell them, what is Glassnode? Why are you guys so important? Why is on-chain analytics such a big thing in Bitcoin?
Sure. So Glassnode is a market intelligence provider or data provider that bases the metrics mostly on on-chain data. On-chain data being the transactional data that is being recorded on the blockchain as new blocks get mined. Glassnode was essentially born out of our own needs. We wanted to get hands on better data, orthogonal data when investing in the space, which I think is crazy doing and not looking at on-chain data these days. What we do is essentially just pull the raw data from the blockchain, and feed it into our systems, and then run all our analyses in order to create metrics that we serve to our clients. We started expanding into derivatives data as well, as we want to bridge that gap between what is happening on chain and what is happening in the markets, and that I think is a super important tool set for any investor in the space. The way I sometimes like to look at it is, imagine having a insights into any account in the US, into any bank account, knowing how much money is in those, how much money is being moved between those, and there's sort of the analogy that on-chain can give you with much more and nicer properties as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to kind of dig into like the revolution of a open, public, permissionless ledger as a financial system later on. But want to kind of dig in more specifically on Glassnode and your role there. You're the CTO. Like, what does that actually kind of entail? And what's your role in kind of constructing these cutting edge ways to look at this data? Because you're not just parsing this data, but you're really you're creating ways to even understand what the data and blockchain information is telling us.
Yeah, so exactly. So I think my background is actually in computational neuroscience, right? I have no background whatsoever in finance and in traditional markets and so on. I come from a very technical background, that allowed me to learn to program, to dig into machine learning, data analytics, all the AI related topics, and so as a CTO, I think that's where I bring in a lot of my expertise that is complemented by those of my co-founders, Jan and Jan, who have more the background in investing and in finance, right? And you're absolutely right. I think we have this open ledger data that is essentially publicly accessible to anyone, and anyone could just potentially go dig in and extract the data and the insights. But there's nuances to that, and there is a huge technical overhead, because if you just look at the raw data as it is in any kind of data set out there, if you look at physics or anything else in natural sciences, it's very noisy, right? You'll not be able to extract any kind of real signal or any information from it if you just look at the raw data. And I think that's what we try to do. We try to really implement that layer between raw Bitcoin on-chain data and real actionable information and insights. And there's a lot of things that go into that layer, right? It can be as simple as an aggregate, such as, hey, how many active addresses did we see in the past hour, up to much more complex things where we really dig deeper and apply heuristics and clustering algorithms, much more advanced methodologies, really in order to go into this vertical path of dissecting these movements of funds between entities, between the major driving forces in this market, such as exchanges and miners, and really assess what is the investor behavior that we can gauge from looking at this data. That's sort of the direction we have taken.
And Rafael, can you describe the process in which you extract this data? Like, do you guys run multiple nodes, or how does that process work?
Exactly. We set up our own nodes. We have a couple of nodes set up geographically across the globe. Just for it's good to have a bit of just good for reliability, really. In case one fails, we listen to the blockchain, to the network. We pull in the data as a new block get mined. We feed it into our systems into a format that we can work with better, and then start building out the metrics on top of that raw data.
Awesome. And what do you think the key benefits are of having a completely transparent blockchain that you can draw data from in this digital economy versus in the traditional economy where things aren't as transparent?
I think the major benefit is that anything is verifiable, right? You don't have that anywhere else. And in fact, you don't have that anywhere else in the crypto space, right? And I think that's a key point here, right? When we started this endeavor in 2017 with all the ICO craze, with all the new exchanges actually popping out of the ground. There's a bunch of reports of wash trading or exchanges reporting fake volumes, manipulating them. That's You don't have that on chain, right? On chain is incorruptible data that is verifiable by anyone and that will be there forever in its current state. And I think that for us was insanely important to really have that asymmetrical information on top of everything else. I think it's beautiful.
So, Rafael, can you talk a little bit about like Bitcoin's history a little bit? We are quote unquote in the new bull market, the 2020, 2021 bull market. But we've seen other bull and bear markets in the past, the 2013, 2017. Kind of looking back, can you point to differences that you're seeing with what we're experiencing now versus what on-chain data is kind of showing from the past?
Yeah, sure. I think on the one hand, Bitcoin has been moving very mechanically, right? Like insanely mechanically. If you look at those cycles, how they just go up and down, really, really matching the halving cycles. It's astonishing to see how predictable this has been so far. So yeah, on the one hand, we have sort of this repetition of the market. On the other hand, we have very clear structural differences, right? If you start in 2013 and so on with essentially just a single exchange where you could go in and buy your Bitcoin, very hard to access. 2017, where many more started popping up. Everything sort of went a bit more mainstream, very retail driven though. And I think what we're seeing now is just is the result of the development that has been happening over the past 4 years, right? And what I mean by that is simply the maturity of the infrastructure that just wasn't available in 2017, which is absolutely necessary for serious money to come in and invest, right? And I think that right now is the big difference, right? It's institutions and institutional capital flowing in. I think we all know from public companies and their official announcements. We're having other conversations, with funds, with family offices that show similar interest. At least are looking into it, and those processes, of course, are a bit longer than for retail investors. But I think that that infrastructure and that institutional money is the biggest difference that we currently see.
And do you have any thoughts on the reduction of supply on exchanges? This has been something that's really been buzzing on Twitter. It's something I've been putting out a couple posts about as well. But just curious, what are your thoughts on what's actually causing that?
Yeah, a good question. I agree. It's a very predominant narrative that has been circulating Twitter for quite a bit now. Listen, I think it's hard to tell to 100%, right? What is happening, but I think that there is clear indications, and I think one of them is very much related to this institutional movement that we're seeing, right? Those are big players that probably will not buy up the order books on a spot exchange, right? Given that the infrastructure has developed so much that there's all these new custodial services and other financial services OTC desks that have the necessary infrastructure in place in order to serve these institutional clients. I think much of that goes into that, right? It's not always 100%. Like we're not always 100% capable of really pinpointing that, right? But we see it in the complexity of on-chain movements, the amounts of on-chain movements that come from exchanges. So I think that's the main driver. I'd like to think that the other one is increased educational, sort of like self-custody mindset of retail investors. But that we see much less, at least from how we interpret the data, because it's mostly larger movements that point to that depletion on exchanges. That being said, right, I think there's nuances when you look at this data. If you, for instance, most of it that we've seen is essentially Coinbase, right? And with Coinbase, we know that they serve institutionals, right? They have a custody service, and so on chain, it's not always 100% clear to differentiate. Is this a spot exchange wallet? Is this a custody wallet? Is this? There's clear indications, and often it's very, very transparent, right? To know that this is a cold wallet or a hot wallet, but it has become much more complex, right? And so I think if you would remove Coinbase from that analysis, then you see that it's actually rather flat, right? We have seen actually increases, for instance, in Binance, where we believe a lot of that is retail driven, right? We, for instance, also track for Gemini, we track custodial wallets as well. That has seen a lot of increase as well, right? So you kind of see that institutional narrative in many of the data points that we're currently observing on chain.
So you touched on a bunch of different players there. It's very interesting to hear that Coinbase is one of the biggest in terms of the reduction, as well as the fact that you are very keen on kind of differentiating between your ability to tell if it's a exchange wallet, spot exchange wallet, or if it's like a custodial wallet. I can imagine a lot of coins leaving Coinbase are just going straight into Coinbase institutional custody. But I guess one of the key parties in the Bitcoin ecosystem that you didn't mention there is miners. And, Will started to point out, there's a trend of miners not selling per se. This is also something that Preston Pysh has kind of like predicted before the halving, in terms of saying like the halving is going to, is going to kill the weaker players. The stronger players are going to get more dominant, and then they're going to be in a position to not sell. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a miner perspective on chain?
Yeah, sure. So I think miners, traditionally were a bit more inclined to just move their coins once they're mined, right? We see that historically, that at least on average, that has been the case, which has structurally changed a bit over the past year. And then recently as well, even though we always see these fluctuations depending on where in the market we currently are, and so we saw some outflows or increased outflows, I would say, up to 40K or so. That has essentially come back down, and we see that accumulation is going on again with respect to miners. But I also think that sometimes those movements are a bit overestimated because the volumes are just not really significant, right? If you look at how much that actually is being moved out of or into miner wallets with respect to everything else that is going in and out of exchanges, for instance, or in the network in general that is settled on chain, it's not significant, right? And so I think people traditionally have been overestimating that influence too much, at least, also with respect to the whole miner capitulation and sellout narrative that was very prominent for many years.
Can you talk a little bit about what you see of the role of miners in the Bitcoin ecosystem, as well as the flow of Bitcoins in general? It sounds like, miner selling is not a huge part of overall flows, but I personally, I hear a lot of, let's call it FUD or uncertainty about like the long-term life cycle of the Bitcoin incentive structure, and kind of how miners could have a negative impact on the overall system. I'm just kind of curious, based on what you see so far on chain, what's the role of miners? How confident do you feel in Bitcoin's incentive structure in the long term regarding miners, kind of based on what you've been able to observe historically?
Yeah, I mean, I based my opinions solely on the data that I've seen so far, right, and that I'm currently seeing, and there's at this point nothing sort of that points towards a bearish future with respect to miners, right? I think the incentives are there. Miners are highly profitable, right? There's a huge conviction for them to hodl at this point, right? Especially given other services that allow them to potentially just borrow in in order to cover their OPEX and CAPEX and everything, right? So that whole minor capitulation narrative and that dystopian future that is always sometimes trying to be painted by folks spreading FUD. At this stage, it's really hard for me to actually see something that points into that direction.
Cool. So I wanted to kind of shift a little bit more towards some like specific metrics and different kinds of things. So I was just curious, what are you seeing in terms of where we kind of are in the broader cycle? What phase of the bull market are we in, if you will?
Yeah, good question. So I think based on historic data, I would say we might be, potentially halfway through somewhere. It's always hard to pinpoint very clearly, but roughly in that ballpark. I think what we have to take care of, and what I'm very curious about, is how the cycle will actually play out, right? Because all of us we know that things have changed and things are different now than they were in the previous cycles, right? So what is the influence on those metrics, right? We often compare it to previous cycles, and where are we if in terms of 2017 and so on and so forth, but we also know that there's no other players in the space that will behave differently in this bull market. So what will that mean for the metrics that we look at? I always take a very pragmatic approach, right? And as long as I don't see an indication that the models and the data are wrong, then I base my decisions on them, as long as this is true. But whether this is going to be a double top or a Supercycle, or something like that, we'll see. I think I look at the data every day and base my predictions or my opinions based on what I currently see, and then adapt from there if something structurally changes.
Awesome. And are you seeing anything correlating with this whole basically narrative that U.S. institutions are kind of driving this bull cycle as kind of an undercurrent of this bull cycle?
I mean, yeah, there's some indications for that, right? I think depletion of supply on exchanges. We've seen a huge increase in whales on chain, at least until the beginning of the year. Right. I think a lot of the infrastructure outside of on chain, such as funds, Grayscale, the ETFs, and so on, are a good indicator for that. So there's definitely some of that, and we've also seen a significant increase in retail recently, over the last couple of weeks, that have come. From my perspective, they have arrived after the institutionals were here, and so yeah, that's something that I'm very curious to keep observing how that actually is being reflected in data.
Awesome. And do you think these lending and borrowing providers like BlockFi, I think is the biggest example. Do you think they're kind of implementing this underlying leverage to this bull market in greater terms than previous ones?
They probably have a significant influence, right? I don't know if significant, but I think that's something that plays into it, right? I mean, look at 2017. Essentially, the whole derivatives market, was not available until December 2017. I think the first Bitcoin future started, right? So that whole run up back then was solely retail driven, right? Now you have the futures, you have the derivatives, you have borrowing and lending services, you have custody, institutional custody. There's so many drivers there that I think are influencing what we're currently seeing, and that's the actual structural difference to the previous markets, or to the previous cycles, and that's where I'm most curious and interested to see how that sort of like plays out within the next couple of months.
Rafael, you kind of hinted at this as you try to keep your opinion based on the data, but you didn't really give a solid answer on what your current outlook is, kind of based on what you're seeing. You're talking about the fundamental differences with Bitcoin. I've been saying that this is the first cycle where Bitcoin is a legitimate asset. And I think that is a fundamentally different thing. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your actual outlook, let's call it, for the next 18 months, kind of based on what you're seeing? And do you believe in the super cycle or any of these other narratives?
Yeah. So I think I'm of course, my answer to this will be very fuzzy. I'm not going to give any numbers, but I think at this point, you're completely right. This is a legitimate asset, and I think it almost feels irresponsible to not to have some money allocated in this, right? I think this is like the opportunity of our generation. I am seeing a lot of upside within the next couple of months, right? We all know, many of the top models that people have that are pointing towards 200K, 300K, the Supercycle believers that think that this cycle will reach a million. I really take this on a week-to-week basis, right? Without having those huge outlooks, but rather really gauge where are we currently, and is something on chain structurally changing, right? With respect to what are the long-term investors doing, right? All those dormant coins, are they coming suddenly, back to life because the opportunity costs of holding Bitcoin, are too high? What do the supply on exchanges continue to do? What are sort of these previous indicators that have pointed towards very clear cycle tops, where are we with respect to those? Is there still room to grow or not? What are the futures markets doing? The options, how bullish and bearish are they? So I look at this really on a week-to-week basis, and try to gauge, where this is going within the next months, or within the next month, essentially. Whether this lasts half a year or a year, 18 months, or unexpectedly maybe even longer because of the capital inflow that we have seen. It's all possible. No one knows, but the data can hint to many of these things, and I think that's absolutely necessary.
And you had touched on this a little bit, but what are you seeing in the behavior of those long-term holders? I think, two metrics that I had looked at this morning where it was dormancy, and you saw dormancy really spike up about a month ago. And then, right around when Tesla had announced, it kind of just dropped off a cliff. And then as well, when you look at longer term holder net position, they really started ramping up selling around like 27K to 32K. And then they've completely dropped off a cliff selling since then. So are you seeing anything else? And how does that compare to previous cycles where they kind of sell into strength? And then do you think they're just waiting for higher prices to sell?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing that you're seeing, right? It doesn't matter if you look at, coin is destroyed, supply that has been last active X years ago. Even things like, the lifespan average or median lifespan. If there's really many metrics where you can sort of, assess these long-term holder behaviors, and it is exactly what you said, right? We saw that ramp up. A lot of people taking profits. Many of those dormant coins came back into circulation, were sold, and now this has been dropping again, right? That's a super bullish sign from my perspective, right? And that is an actual sign that this is not over yet, right? Because if it was, that curve would still be spiking up, right? We would see more of that. We would see more of those holders, cashing out, de-risking their portfolios, and really, just selling for the sake of profits. So this has been coming down, which I feel is a very positive sign, and one that points that we're not close to a top yet.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well when you look at minor net position. It was the same kind of deal. You saw right around like high 20s, low 30s. They started ramping up selling as well, and they've since stopped. And then that indicator flipped green the last week or so. I just find that very interesting.
And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because it was exactly that period where we hit the previous all-time high, so that sort of that maybe people that were just hit break even or so, that bought the previous top, stuff like this, where I think those weaker hands, we're just taking profits, sold into the market, into strong hands, and now that has depleted again, and now it's we're at what, 50-55, and we're not seeing that currently with most recent news. So I think that's bullish.
And how about in terms of short-term holders or retail? Can you see anything on chain that's really indicating? I know I talked with Checkmate the other day, and he said that he could see that retail was here. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, retail is here. I think we've seen a huge spike in the increase of network entities, essentially. So really cluster of addresses that are new to the network. So I think it's very clear that they have been arriving in the last couple of weeks, maybe 2 months. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, that interplay between institutional money and that sort of like second wave of retail that has been approaching in the past couple of weeks.
Awesome. And I'm just curious, what are some of your favorite metrics on chain to look at? Like, what are the ones that you check every morning and like to get updated on?
That's a tough one, because I spend so much time on our charts, and I spend so much time, looking at all kinds of different things. Often base what I'm looking at, a bit on price action, a bit on, am I looking more into trying to gauge whether, what kind of a dip is this, or if we're at towards the end of a correction, whether it might be a good entry point to stack some more sats, or whether I'm really trying to gauge more sort of like the big picture, right? So I think for short-term things, things that I like to look at is SOPR. This is one of the beautiful ones. But then off-chain is the funding rate, of course. That sort of gives you a good indication of sort of current sentiment, and whether things are potentially a bit over leveraged. I always keep an eye on really the hodlers, so the long-term investors. Again, I think you can look at that sort of a bit from a more macro perspective. So what is sort of the average behavior, and how has it been trending over the last couple of weeks and months? But also if suddenly there's a spike of older coins coming back into circulation. I keep an eye on these smart market cycle indicators. Stuff like the net unrealized profit loss, like the reserve risk, the MVRVZ, market cap to thermal cap. Really, try to gauge, how is that sort of like behaving in terms of the direction that we're heading towards. I mean, I could go on and on. It's one thing that I've been very interested in, and actually surprised to see to that amount is really the amount of on-chain activity of sort of like a realized price and realized price distributions at these levels, right? Which really points towards a lot of capital flowing in, and very strong on-chain supports. It's a tough question. Many people ask me, like what's your favorite metric? What do you look at? And then this changes so fast. And then suddenly I see myself, oh, I haven't looked at this, for 3 days because I've been so focused on this other set of exchanges. Of metrics, sorry. Exchange metrics, of course. Even though I don't look at exchange metrics on this very high frequent periods, right? Those spikes of I don't know, 10K moving out or so. Often those are really internal transfers of exchanges reshuffling into a new wallet, right? And that's something we have all kinds of algorithms in place to detect those, and we do for the most cases. But sometimes if a new wallet is being created, a new address that has never been seen in the network, it's just impossible, right? And so with respect to those, I rather look at the macro perspective of the trends, and see look at if that trend actually changes, and how that differs across exchanges.
I suppose it's important to get confluence across multiple indicators, right? You can't just go off of one thing and draw a conclusion.
It is. This is a multidimensional space, man. I think it's super important to just look out for all these different factors that give you a bit of a different edge and a bit of a different insight in what is happening. I think you will not get, otherwise, we'd be building a product where we create, one super metric, and just sell that one for a lot of money, and that would be enough for people to gauge where we are and where we're heading, and whether we're reaching a top and what the network is doing. That's just simply not the case. There's so many different angles to this, and I think it's important to take all of those into account.
So I wanted to ask about two specific metrics. The first one was SOPR, which I think, like, for the audience, they might gain some value out of understanding that. And the second one was the URPD. And I had been looking at this recently, and it's very interesting that you see the amount of capital flowing. I think Willy Woo posted that over 10% of Bitcoin's money supply has moved over the $1 trillion market cap. So what does that really signal in terms of how to interpret the data? Because it seems like that's the largest cluster of volume since like $10,000 to $11,000 last year.
That's absolutely correct. That's what I just hinted at, right? That it actually has been a bit surprising to me that there is so much on-chain volume within these ranges, right? And therefore, it points towards a lot of conviction and a lot of verification that these prices are legitimate, right? And that people are expecting more upside, right? So it sort of like forms this cluster around, the 53 to 60, right? The current range that we are in, that serves as a major support on chain. If you compare that, to, I don't know, 20s, right, 20 to 30K, that there's essentially nothing there, right? I mean, it has also to do that we sort of, surpassed that range very fast. I think it was, I don't know, 2 weeks or so that we were in there. But that capital inflow that we're currently seeing and we're seeing in the URPD is really amazing. I think this is extremely bullish. So it's something I'm keeping my eyes on very closely as well. And then with respect to SOPR, for those that don't know, SOPR essentially gives you an indication of all the volume that we see on chain, whether that is being moved, at a profit or at a loss, right? And to which extent. So SOPR is very nice, sort of like, to gauge whether a lot of profit movements are happening on chain, and that, if that overextends, that can always become a bit dangerous. And so what you're always looking at, especially in bull markets, is to really have these resets back to one, right, where we sort of like hit the neutral line that serves, for potential leg up as well. I was actually looking at it this morning. I think on the hourly, I look at, I think, 3 or 6 hour moving average. We're at that neutral line, right? I think it could be a good or it was, I don't know how it looks. It was a couple of hours ago, a good entry point as well. So yeah, these are super exciting metrics, and some that I look at every day as well.
Awesome. And so one other question kind of on that note, how do you guys filter out this entity adjusted, you have like entity adjusted SOPR and some of these other metrics? What goes into clustering and then the kind of algorithms that you guys have in place to create those data points?
Sure. So I think many of those things come from from the UTXO design of Bitcoin, right? Where you can essentially identify patterns of UTXOs that are spent together. What of those are flowing in what kind of address types? There's really like a variety of heuristics that you can apply, and then you can go beyond that, and then apply sort of machine learning methods or statistical pattern recognition, where you actually look at address balances in transaction sizes and all kinds of different things that then group those addresses with with a certain probability, with a very high probability in that case, right? And so the beautiful thing about that is then if you have those clusters of addresses, you can then essentially, for all the metrics that you have, simply filter out all transactions that happen within addresses that belong to that same cluster, right? Because ultimately that might just not point towards actual economic throughput, right? What you're interested in is really not, if coins from my hot wallet are moving into my hardware wallet, but if I'm actually selling those, or if I'm transferring those to a different entity. That, of course, it's a probabilistic space, right? So you can't always tell for sure, but you can tell to an extent that gives you a much better signal and underlying number as compared to just looking at the raw data.
All right, Rafael, here's the $1 million question here that everybody wants to know. How do you know how to time the cycle? When does everybody need to cash out? What are some of the indicators that you look to see that this cycle is really getting kind of overheated?
Yeah, that's that is a good question, and again, I think we'll have to see how this plays out, because things are different now, right? So are those metrics that we're pointing towards those cycle tops, are they are they going to be predictive again, right? Essentially, to time Bitcoin tops, I feel is much more difficult than bottoms, of course. I mean, just and especially in this cycle, I think it will be even more so, because those metrics could be underestimating the levels to which we will go, but who knows? Some of the, just to name two sort of like metric families that I look at, and I think I pointed towards those already in our before. One of those is those market cycle indicators, right? The ones that really have been very predictive. Those oscillators across those major cycles, right? That's something that I keep my eyes on. And for instance, if you look at Nopal, if it's sort of the unrealized profits with respect to the current market cap, if they cross 75%, 80% or so, previously that kind of starts moving towards towards ranges that could point towards something where we might be close, actually a bit higher, I guess, more the 80 to 90% range. And then the other one is really the hodl waves, right? Long-term investors, if there is a lot of, if opportunity costs to hold Bitcoin for whatever reasons become too high, if they see more, if they're inclined to start moving and to start selling, then that's something where I'll be very cautious, and where I will keep my eyes on very closely. Just to mention two of the things that I look at to sort of like aug those cycle tops.
Awesome. And, I think it goes back to the whole thing about confluence, right? Because something like Nopal looks like it's getting pretty toppy a little, it's getting up close to that 0.75 mark, but, some different indicators that you had touched on, they're looking like they still have some room to run. So I wanted to transition the conversation a little bit into, what do you kind of see the future of on-chain analytics becoming, especially, as we move towards this more digital economy and kind of like a hyper Bitcoinization world, if you will?
Yeah, it's I think we know that this is here to stay, right? This is a legitimate asset, and this is the big boys are here, and the big money is here. So crypto intelligence, Bitcoin intelligence, and the data that is being used for that is absolutely necessary, right? And I think no one coming into the space, really seriously to stay here, is going to do this without looking at data. And I think that on chain just gives you that additional edge that traditional markets can't, right? And I think it's almost stupid, to invest in the space without keeping a close eye on, network data. So I think this is very, very crucial as we move forward as well, and as more players are in the space, as things just develop and become more mature. The on-chain dynamics will also change, right? And we've seen that, right? Whether it's security reasons or privacy reasons, the way people transact, whether it's second layers such as the Lightning Network, all the infrastructure that has been implemented, where we see exchange flows are much more complex than they used to be a couple of years ago. That is knowledge, and that is those are challenges that we face, and where we try to stay ahead of everything, and really try to dig really as deep as necessary in order to keep providing that signal and those numbers that are necessary for investors, for fundamental researchers, for anyone interested in the space. And I think this will, if anything, this will become more and more important as we move forward.
Awesome. And one last question for me is just, where can the audience go to just kind of learn more about on-chain and kind of dip their toes in the water? I know you guys have like Glassnode Academy.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Twitter is definitely a good place. Although sometimes it's hard to separate the signal from the noise there as well. So, but we all know that. And so exactly, we have a newsletter, and we often do reports where we try to sort of combine the educational aspect of on-chain with what it is currently telling us about the markets. We have Academy, exactly, where we try to increase the explainers for the metrics that we have. We'll be releasing a bunch of more educational content together with Checkmatey, that is helping us a lot there. Video content as well on the metrics that we have. So yeah, I think a lot of good things coming there, and a lot of more educational content that people can start using to dig deeper into on-chain analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Checkmatey is doing a monthly series on Bitcoin Magazine as well. So the first one is available on Bitcoin Magazine, kind of an introduction to on-chain analytics and analysis. Rafael, thank you so much for coming on. You talked about a lot of different metrics, so we're going to pull all of them together and make sure that all of them are in the show notes. So for all the listeners, if you heard some acronyms that you just don't know what they mean, all the resources will be in the show notes, but you can also check out Glassnode to learn more about all those metrics. Rafael, I want to give you a chance to have a last word, as well as kind of plug the different tiers and levels of like the Glassnode analytics suite.
Yeah, sure. So we have essentially 3 plans, right? A lot of our metrics we give out for free on the standard plan, so you can just sign up and really start looking at those metrics. Our newsletter is free as well. A lot of free content that we have. Then we have essentially 2 paid plans. One is the advanced plan, more targeted towards retail and sort of like lower frequency metrics, and then our professional package that essentially gives you full access to everything that we have and everything that we produce and that we will produce. We keep pushing new metrics and new content on a weekly basis. So I think the best thing is just stay alert on Twitter and keep checking out our platform. Many exciting things coming in the future there.
Speaking of Twitter, where can people follow you as well as Glassnode?
Yeah, so Glassnode is simply at Glassnode. I am at Neocortex. The first E is a 3. So that's the best way to reach out and to follow some of the stuff that we do.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, big fan. I think you guys have really democratized access to this information, which is one of the most important things. So thank you so much for making so much of this information free and available just to the average Bitcoin and retail enthusiasts out there. You guys make sure to follow me at CK_snarks and at Bitcoin Magazine. And want to plug Will. Why don't you tell people where they can follow you? You got to follow this guy. He's putting out such good information. He's diving really deep into Glassnode and sharing a lot of that stuff out on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I just want to show Glassnode a little bit. I'm sure if any of the listeners get on there, you're going to just find yourself on there for multiple hours a day digging through the different data points. But my Twitter is W Clemente and then 3 I's at the end because I am the third. So.
All right. Awesome. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was educational. Again, Rafael, I know you're very busy, so thank you for the time. This was an absolutely amazing podcast. Give us those 5-star reviews and make sure to share this podcast out, get it out far and wide. Thanks so much. And with that, peace.